of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. It's so nice to see you again. I really missed you last week. However, I've been dealing with a flare-up of my chronic illnesses, and I just had to save my energy for things like grocery shopping because, unfortunately, I need to be fed every single day. I don't know what's up with that. So, because it's been 2 weeks, I have quite a few finished objects to share with you. If you're a returning viewer, it's so nice to see you again. And if you're a new viewer, I'm really glad you found your way to my little corner of the internet. I record 2 different kinds of episodes. The project snapshots only talk about my works in progress, and then there are the episodes like today, where I talk about finished objects as well as other various knitting segments. And because I have so many finished objects, I'm not sure that I'll have an actual topic to get to this week. I think that might make the episode run ridiculously long. However, I do have a yarn review for you, a Schrödinger sock segment. I'll be reading to you a little excerpt from a book. And I am returning Knits in the Wild. If you've been watching for a while, definitely over a year, maybe longer, you will have known that for a while I was doing a segment where I had taken photos of myself wearing my various hand knits, and then I just posted them all in the video. However, that took a lot of editing work, and it also required me to be in a somewhat photogenic state, there we go, and my apartment to also be in a somewhat photogenic state whenever I was wearing clothes and knits. So I ended up just kind of discontinuing it. It was too much work. However, I have figured out a few tricks to make taking the photographs easier, plus I have a new camera now that I can use my phone as a remote control, so that makes it a lot easier. And also, I've realized that before I would always do like voiceover where I was describing the outfits, and that's what took so much editing work. So if I just put all the photos at the end with a music accompaniment, don't worry, the music will be the same volume as my voice, then that's way less editing work for me, and you still get to see how I wear my hand knits in case you're interested. And if you follow me on Instagram, some of these will be repeats, some of them won't. But if you don't follow me on Instagram, they'll all be new. And as I said, that's going to be at the very end, so that if you're not interested, you can just stop. And if you are interested, then you can see how I style my hand knits. I have a very quirky style, so I'm not sure how much use that is if you don't want to dress quirkily, but it's fun. So I'm very pleased to be returning that. One other administrative detail, I have started a comment thread in the Ravelry group. So it occurred to me that using Instagram and YouTube as my sources of communication with all of you viewers was leaving out people who had Ravelry accounts but didn't have accounts on either of those 2 social media websites. And that's a real shame because, of course, as a knitter, Ravelry, like, we all have Ravelry accounts, right? Even if we don't have accounts on YouTube and just watch the videos instead of subscribing. But keeping up with an entire Ravelry group is just too much for me. And so I tried to analyze what made it easy for me to reply to comments on YouTube and not on Ravelry. And I think what it comes down to is having everything in the same place. And then also just the way Ravelry's forms are set up is not conducive to the way that I like to reply, but I can deal with that. So, if you want me to reply, and I've changed the group header to reflect this, go to the thread. It's sticky, so it's always going to be on top, and it just says comment section, I think, and any episode, anything like that, just leave your comment there, and I will reply to it. I promise. As quickly as I do on YouTube and Instagram. So, hopefully you appreciate that change in case you have been annoyed by the fact that you couldn't leave comments because you don't have a YouTube account or something like that. I do not usually talk this much about like meta podcast stuff, so if you are a new viewer, I'm sorry it's taken almost 5 minutes for us to get into the knitting. That is definitely not normal. But so I am wearing my Melusine cardigan, which you can just see. It's one that I designed myself using the Twisted Stitch Knitting Stitch Dictionary, which is from Schoolhouse Press. And I knit this, I think, 2 autumns ago. And it's still one of my very favorite cardigans. It's knit out of Quince & Company Tern in the, not Booth Bay, not Petrol. Apparently I am blanking on the colorway name. That almost never happens to me. I'm really interested in colors, so I usually remember their names, but it's a very pretty teal color, whatever it's called, and you can find it on my project page if you're interested in more details. But yeah, it's really funny. Sometimes I think that this sweater fits me better than some of the sweaters I've made more recently. Like, it seems like I should be getting better at fitting sweaters and not worse. And with that, let's talk about finished objects. Oh, Thistle is here, in case you were wondering. She's my dog co-host, and my kitty co-host Moth just showed up. Unfortunately, you can't quite see her other than her tail, but here's the rest of her, in case you're a new viewer and don't know what she looks like. So first up, I will show you a finished object that you've seen before if you watch my progress snapshot photos, and that is my Our Victorian Grandmother's Cowl. I might just leave this on. It's quite chilly today. It's nice to have that extra thing. I really love how this turned out. This is a cowl of my own design, and before I forget, it's knit out of Blue Moon Fiber Arts in their Blueface Luster Sport, which is regular, it's not superwash, and the colorway is PDX Rose City, which is this absolutely beautiful blush. I love it very much. If you prefer cooler pinks, as opposed to kind of like the warmer, verging on white people nude pinks, then this is your bet. And unfortunately, I've become more sensitive to BFL, so this was a sweater, and I couldn't wear it because it was irritating my back and my arms. But as a cowl, it's perfect, so at least I'm lucky that my neck and chest area are not sensitive. And because it's got that BFL, which is a long wool sheep breed, it has this absolutely wonderful drape, and I love this. This will be my third cowl, and I really don't know why I haven't knit more because I wear them, like I find them very, very easy to style. And they're also a little more functional than long scarves, even though I love how long scarves look, because I walk Thistle, and so, you know, I pick up after her, or I'm bending down to leash her, and whenever I'm bending down, I have to, like, make sure that the scarf isn't touching anything, so. Cowls are perfect, and I knit this to 60 inches, which is going to be 150 centimeters, and for me that's the perfect length so that I can loop it twice for kind of, you know, like fashion, I guess, or 3 times when it's really cold and I want to keep out all the drafts. I have a very short neck, so that's why I prefer it to be a little looser when I'm just doing it for style. So I have learned by trial and error this is my ideal length. I think it's about 12 inches wide, which I also learned from trial and error. The second cowl that I knit, I had to knit twice because the first time I knit it very wide, and then it was a Polworth, so it was very bouncy and stood up on its own, and so it like ate me when I tried to wrap it around my neck. So all that information will be on the project page. I used 2 different stitches, and that is the inspiration for the name because they're both from Barbara Walker's Stitch Dictionary. I think her second one. And in the description of one of the stitches, if you can hear little paw prints, that's Thistle. She had jumped down, so now she's back up. I wish you could see my lap. There she is, and Moth is also my lap. Anyway, in the description of the porcupine stitch, Barbara Walker says that it reminds her of the things that our Victorian grandmothers called clouds, which it sounds like were some kind of neckwear hood hybrid. I don't know, it sounds appealing to me, but then I like old-fashioned clothing, so. It was interesting, and I picked both of these stitches, so it's the porcupine stitch and then the grand trefoil. I think that's how you'd say it in English. I picked both those stitches because they're reversible, and I really like it when I can just wrap my cowl around and I don't have to worry about there being a wrong side and a right side. And then they're both lace stitches, but the porcupine stitch is much more closed, and the grand trefoil is much more open. I did to where it marked. So what I did was I knit half and half, and that way I thought when I had it wrapped around my neck, it would have that kind of interesting contrast. Which it does, but I think next time, instead of doing half and half, I would do it in quarters. I would do 1 quarter, like AB, AB, basically. Because it turns out that the way you wrap cowls, if you just have half and half, it can be kind of tricky to have them both showing at once. So I'm not fussing with it right now because the camera is kind of a distance from me, so I can't really see myself. But when I put it on in front of the mirror, I kind of just have to move it around until I can see both the stitch patterns. So next time I definitely do AB, AB instead of A. But I really like how it turned out, and I'm really excited to be able to wear it because I love this color, and it goes with pretty much everything in my wardrobe. I think it goes with the teal and everything as well. Other things to talk about. Oh, it was interesting. The grand trefoil, as hopefully you saw when I held it up, is a very, very open stitch. There are double yarn overs in every round. It's a 3-row repeat. Sorry, skip a week podcasting and your throat is no longer conditioned. So it's a 3-row repeat with double yarn overs. And it's so open that even though I went down 2 needle sizes, so I knit the porcupine stitch on a size 6, I went down to a size 4 for the grand trefoil, but within a few repeats it was very obvious that it was still a lot wider. So I ended up having to decrease from, I think, 62 stitches on the porcupine stitch, maybe 64, to 39 stitches on the grand trefoil. And that's with going down 2 needle sizes. So because of that, the second half of this went really quickly. And it also made for quite a lightweight, low yardage cowl. This, as you saw, loops twice, and it only took a little over 400 yards, I think 410 yards. So I've got some yarn left over. I've got about 70 grams left over. Ravelry thinks that I should have 140 grams left over, so I'm not really sure where the missing 70 grams went. I don't think I lost 70 grams when I unraveled the sweater. I'll have to do some weighing on my kitchen scale. Yeah. And then I knit this as a long scarf, and then I grafted it at the end. So I used a provisional cast on. And the porcupine stitch, luckily for me, has a place in the repeat where you do 3 rows of stockinette. And so what I did, I provisionally cast on, and then I started in the row right after that. No, I started with 1 row of stockinette, and then I did the next pattern. So basically, there were 2 rows of stockinette that were available for grafting. And I learned when I was knitting my mom's garter stitch scarf that when you graft, it actually creates 2 rows, not 1 row. I had never noticed this before, but it was really obvious. I'm not sure if it was because I knit my mom's scarf in cotton or if I was just paying more attention or what, but I went to graft it using just the normal grafting method in garter, and I had stopped both ends in a purl, so I figured I would graft and it would create a stockinette row and it would be invisible in the garter stitch. But instead it was very obvious. So I ended up learning how to graft in garter, which is pretty simple, and I have a link to that tutorial on that scarf project page. But because now I know that it creates 2 rows, I stopped when I was ready to graft. I didn't do any rows of stockinette beforehand. So then when I was grafting, those 2 rows really worked in pattern. And honestly, I can't tell which side is grafted and which side I just switched from one pattern to the other. I was looking at it so that I could hold it up to the camera and show you guys so you could look for yourselves, and I can't find where I wove in the ends. I can't tell which side is grafted and which isn't. So clearly that worked well. I'm pretty pleased about that, and I wonder if that's part of why I've had issues with grafting not quite looking invisible when I'm doing scarves before, is because I was always assuming that it was only creating 1 row, not 2. Knitting is so fascinating, isn't it? And it looks like I need to start another segment, and then I have some more finished objects for you. These are the next project I'm going to talk about, and since I have to get up for the camera anyway, I thought I would do a close-up because I'm going to be talking about my continuing issues with laddering on double-pointed needles, and you can kind of see that I completely forgot I was having an issue with laddering, And then suddenly I remembered that last episode, one of you lovely commenters told me that I should just pull the second stitch on each DPN tighter. So I started doing that here, and then I remembered for most of this mitt, and I think this mitt definitely has less of a laddering problem. You can still see where I switched needles, but these also haven't been blocked, and I mean, you can definitely see that there's an improvement there. So that's why we're close. And that way, hopefully you can see sparkly beads. Okay, gonna go sit down. Hi, YouTube. Both the pets are in my seat right now. Let's see if they scatter. Yep. So these are what I'm calling rose trellis mitts because I'm calling the scarf that matches them the rose trellis scarf. Because this color looks very rose to me. And they're kind of a very graphic pattern. These are for my mom. And I actually still haven't finished the scarf, but I wanted to do the mitts first, just to make sure I didn't run out of yarn. So this is a lace yarn. It's a linen silk blend by Anzula, and the colorway is mulberry. I can't remember what the name of the yarn base is. Breeze. It's called Breeze. And my mom picked out this skein of yarn when I was visiting for Christmas last year. There's a yarn store right near her house, which is wonderful. And they always do a post-Christmas sale, which is perfect. So she picked out this yarn for a scarf, and I was knitting the scarf, and I realized that the yarn is going really far, so unless she wanted a super long scarf, I was going to have a lot of leftovers. So I consulted her about it, and she said she would rather have a shorter scarf and a matching pair of mitts. So, and she wanted beads on the mitts as well as on the scarf. She has developed a fondness for beads and sparkly things, and I can't blame her. These are so pretty, aren't they? I'm really pleased with how they turned out. So I found a beaded lace mitt pattern on Ravelry. It only has 8 or 9 projects, I think, which really surprised me. It's the chevron lace mitts, and it's free. And I just think it's absolutely beautiful. So you have a lot of beads down in the ribbing, and then just one bead going up that center chevron. I did modify a few things. Trying to remember what. I knit the smallest size. It comes in 3 sizes. And I know that I modified this top cuff to be 1x1 rib so that I could do a tubular, well, the invisible 1x1 ribbed cast off because I just think that looks so pretty, especially on mitts. Because you're looking at your hands a lot, so it creates, in my opinion, the neatest finish. And then I might have done the thumb gusset differently because I have a preferred thumb gusset. I've gotten to the point in my knitting where a lot of times I don't even read all the pattern anymore. Isn't that terrible? I know, I really should. But instead I kind of take elements from the pattern and graft it onto my like mental image of what mitt should be. So the one thing that I will say is I did make a little mistake on the gusset. I increased every other round, which usually works out fine, but here I think I really should have increased every 3rd round and made it longer because you can see that the ribbing part is pulling up just a bit. And then for the thumb I also did 1x1 ribbing with the invisible cast off. Those might be the only changes I made. I knit them on size 0s, aiming for about 8 stitches to the inch. It is a lace weight yarn, but it's also a linen silk blend, so, and it's not a super fine lace weight yarn, so I don't know. My mom has small hands like me. They fit. And I was going to do longer cuffs because it's nice to have a long cuff on mitts. However, the thing about linen silk blends is that there's nothing in that yarn that is creating elasticity. So there's nothing that's going to make it really hug your arm. So you can see it's already a little bit bigger than it was when I knit it. And I expect it's going to grow a bit as we continue, like as it gets worn. So I thought it would be really annoying. Oh, sorry. There's a lot of, I don't want to call it veg matter in this yarn. It's more like tiny little bits of plastic, which is kind of weird, but I'm okay with picking it out. Anyway, I thought it would be really annoying if the mitt was longer and it was growing, whereas when it's pretty short, then it's not such a big deal for it to not be super snug against your wrist. So that was the thought process there. I had to knit the second mitt twice. knitting when I'm in a flare-up, I make a lot more mistakes because part of being in a flare-up is my brain doesn't function as well, so I just don't notice things, and that leads to bad results. So I got all the way to 2 rows before the bind off on the second MIP, and I was so pleased with myself. And then I realized that I hadn't centered this beading over the ribbing. You can't center it perfectly because this is a 2x2 rib, and this is like, you know, 1 stitch. However, you can center it so that it's at least over the knit column and not over a purl one. And I'd done that on the first mitt, and then on the second one it was off. And I tried to convince myself it wouldn't matter because I really didn't want to have to knit it again because I've been having quite a few setbacks. But it does matter. It matters to me. Especially with gift knitting. I want things to be as lovely as they can be. And I don't know if my mom would ever notice that or not, but just in case. So before I could give myself time to talk myself into accepting it, I just pulled the needles out and pulled it all out so that that was no longer an option. So I pulled back to the ribbing and started again. These are still pretty quick, especially once you get to here, because of course beading takes quite a bit of time. Like, it slows you down, but once you get to here, you're only doing 1 bead every 4th round. So I think this would be, especially this part, would be a really good first beading project for beginners. Down here, you'll get a lot of practice adding beads because there's a lot more. But it's really pretty. I'm not sure how many beads it took. When I bought the yarn for my mom's shawl scarf, we also went to Michael's and I had her pick out the beads she wanted, and I bought 2 vials because the pattern for that scarf calls for over 100 beads, and I have absolutely no concept of how many beads are in a 9-gram vial, and it turns out there's a lot more. Like, I definitely could have done the scarf with just 1 vial and had quite a few left over. But this way I got to put lots of beads on the mitts and not worry about it. I use a tiny crochet hook to bead. I used to use the dental floss method, which was very long and tedious. And it was worth it, but it was very fiddly. But then I discovered I inherited a bag of notions from my great-grandmother, who was also very into fiber arts, although I didn't really know her. But I inherited this when I was 11, because at the time I was very into crocheting when my great-grandmother passed away, and none of her daughters were into yarn crafts, like they did quilting, that kind of stuff. So my Grammy passed it along to me, and I think last year, I was going back through, and I used quite a few of these notions every day, but I hadn't looked through the bag in a while, and I noticed that there was this tiny crochet hook. I mean, the point of it is going to poke through almost all fabric. It's so tiny. And it was absolutely perfect for putting on beads. And so now I enjoy beading even more because I don't have to fiddle with the dental floss. So I would suggest, you know, the dental floss method is obviously very cheap. So try it out. But if you do get into beading, having a little crochet hook makes a very big difference. And these are just 6/0 beads, which I think is the usual size for lace and fingering weight beading. Here's the next finished object I'm going to talk about. Obviously, I am being extra long-winded talking about all my projects today, so we will definitely not get to a topic, but all the other things that I said that I would talk about will be included. Okay. This is the Autumn in Rivendell hat, which I knit for a friend of mine, and I absolutely love how it came out. I designed this one myself, but I used the Schwook pattern, which is a free pattern from Hazel Tyndall, who is an absolutely wonderful Shetland knitter. And I think it was the first Shetland Wool Week pattern. And so what I did was I used her measurements. I did have to change them because my gauge was a little bigger. And I used the teal decorative one is from the pattern. And then I used the same idea for these 2 bands, but I used a different pattern. And then I used her crown, which is so beautiful. I have never knit a Fair Isle beanie before. I've only knit berets, so I definitely wanted to have an expert guiding me as far as sizing went. And the reason why I ended up switching motifs is because when I tried the motif that she used in her hat, it's a wonderful motif, but in these colors, it looked a little scout camp to me, which is not to my friend's taste. So I thought a more delicate one would be really nice. So I talked a lot about the swatching process and how I settled on colors in my last episode, so I'm not going to rehash all that, but most of these are Alice Starmore Hebridean 2-ply. And so the teal is lapwing, the gold is golden plover, and then in this band, it is crodal is the brown, fading into sundew, and then the yellow, the pale yellow is spindrift, and it fades into Jameson's, I think just Jameson's, Eset / white, it's like a marl. And then up here is the crodal and spindrift again. And then this one is mountain hare, and sea anemone is the bright red, and then the background is Jameson's in peat, which is a really lovely brown. And I used all the colors again on the crown. So I did add more colors than Hazel Tyndall calls for as well, because when you're celebrating autumn, you need to do all the colors. And then I did a corrugated rib, which I've done. Okay, I am not really suited to beanies, but this way you can see it fits quite snugly. There's just a little bit of slouch at the back, but not a huge amount. And I think that will suit my friend. She told me she didn't know what type of hat she liked to knit or liked to wear. So I wanted one that would sit pretty low so that it would cover her ears when the cold weather comes, so then it's not slouchy at all. And was pretty snug. She's got really long, beautiful red hair. And so, I don't know, it didn't strike me that she would want a super slouchy beanie. She doesn't dress in that kind of slouchy beanie, modern slouchy style, if that makes sense. I don't know. So hopefully this shape works for her. I'm sure she'll love the colors because I showed her the swatch just to make sure. And she looks wonderful in all of these colors anyway. So this I also knit twice. I mean, I knit the swatches a lot in order to sort out the colors, but I also knit this entire hat twice because, except for the crown. The first time I didn't have this band of teal in because since my stitch gauge was bigger, I assumed my row gauge would be bigger, and I got all the way to the crown decreases, and the hat seemed a little short, and it just didn't look good to have this one right next to this one. It was too much brown, too much yellow. I don't know, it was just too much. And once again, I was in denial for like 10 minutes, and I thought maybe I'll just chop the ribbing off and graft it. But that's a lot of grafting, and I didn't want to mess with the fit of the hat. You know, I didn't want it to be less stretchy since it was already pretty snug to begin with. So finally I bit the bullet and ripped it all the way back to the ribbing. At least I didn't have to do the corrugated rib again because I love the way corrugated rib looks, but I cannot stand knitting it. It really hurts my hands. I'm not sure why, but so yeah, so I ripped all the way back and then I re-knit back up, adding in that band of lapwing, and I'm really glad I did because it's incredibly beautiful. And it really, having all three bands, I think just adds a really nice balance. So, I think that's about it. Because I had done felt spit splice joins, at least the second time I didn't have to mess with yarn, the color changes as frequently. However, at various points I decided to leave ends out. I did all the ends, I left them all out on the crown because I hadn't tried the crown color in advance, so if I wanted to rip back and change something, I wanted it to be easy. I didn't want to have felted the yarn. And then I left the ends out every time I switched between the brown and the teal, just so that I can weave those in and hide any joins that there might be. And of course I had to leave the ends out for this part because it wasn't in the initial thing. So I have not woven those in yet. And it's so funny to me that even if you wet splice the majority of the color change ends, whenever you knit a hat like this, you just end up with so many ends. The very first beret I knit that had this many color changes, I just left the ends until the end, and I had to weave in, I think, 98 ends. It was intense. The good news is yarn like this felts really well, so you don't have to weave each end in a lot in order for it to be secure. So it shouldn't take that long, but it's just funny to me. I also left them out because with my chronic illnesses, I have neck and shoulder issues, and it got to the point where rubbing the yarn together was just really hurting me. Remember, I was knitting during a flare-up, and so I decided it was just easier to leave the ends. Honestly, I think it probably goes as quickly to weave them in with yarn like this, where you don't have to weave a whole lot, just a few times, as it does to wet splice. It's just a question of whether you want to do it as you go or have to do it all at the end. I never ever weave in like needle style as I go, because I am very paranoid that as soon as I weave in ends, I'm going to have to rip it back for some reason, and then I'm going to have to try to get those ends back out. So that's why I always leave it till the end, unless I'm doing a felt splicing. So yeah. The other great thing about these yarns, they're woolen spun, so this hat is super lightweight. I think it only comes in at 30 grams, so it'll be really easy to just like stuff into a pocket. And I'm really excited. I wish I didn't have to wait until December to give this to her, but there you go. I have two more finished objects. They are both socks for me. You've seen one of them before, but not the other one. So, I finished my spider socks. I talked a lot about these in the last episode. They don't suit sock blockers well, so good thing I have arms, although now it's upside down. This is a free pattern called Spider Socks, and I knit them with Barocco Ultra Alpaca Fine in the Moon Shadow colorway, which is this lovely light gray heather. And I love them so much. They were my Halloween socks this year. This is the second year I've knit Halloween socks, and I definitely want to make it an annual tradition. Halloween is one of my very favorite holidays, along with Christmas and my birthday. Let's be honest. Presents are fun. Anyway, and so it's really nice to just have some celebratory creepy socks. Although I love spiders, I don't think they're creepy. I think they're awesome. So I named these Something Skillful This Way Comes, which is a play on, of course, Shakespeare, and also a great Ray Bradbury novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is like a Halloween, October, really disturbing. It's got like the creepiest library scene ever in it. Little book about two boys and a wicked traveling circus that comes to town. But since I love spiders, I don't want to call them wicked, so I called them skillful because they spin. Some of them spin, and they're all just, I don't know, I like spiders. So there's the big spider up here, and on the second one I put that on the foot, and then the little tiny bobble spiders are on the foot on this one and the leg on this one. That way when I'm wearing the socks, I can see all the wonderful spiders. Yeah. This didn't take much yarn at all. I think about 54 grams, because I made it pretty short so that I can wear them with Oxfords in the autumn. And I'm really glad that I've knit myself some shorter pairs of socks. They worked really well during that kind of transitional season, but now that the weather has cooled off, I'm back in my long socks and very grateful for them. So I think when I'm knitting socks in the future, I'll try to balance out. The reason why I knit so many short pairs in a row is because I'd only knit longer pairs. By longer, I mean really average. So these are my More Falling Leaves socks. I finished them 2 days ago, and I have already worn them, so just pretend you don't see the cat fur. I'm always in awe of those podcasters who say, oh, now that I've shown it to you, I will wear it, because literally, I finish grafting the toe, I weave in the ends, and I pull the socks on. I get really excited about new socks. So, these are a replacement for a pair of burgundy socks that I knit in this exact same leaf lace pattern. They were, I think, the third pair of socks I knit very early in my knitting career, and they were out of Cascade Heritage Solid, because that's what my local yarn store had, and a really pretty burgundy, and that yarn was terrible. The socks looked pilly and felted and old, like pretty much as soon as they were off the needles, and things have not gotten better since then. I talked about this in a yarn review at some point, in my backlog of episodes. So I have been wanting to knit a replacement pair out of Quince & Company Finch, which is my new favorite sock yarn. And I finally just bought a skein in Barolo, which is their burgundy color, so that I could go ahead and do that. And just in case, I thought it might be interesting for you to see, Quince has two dark red colors. So this is Barolo, which is more in the brown maroon, and this is Malbec, which is more in the wine burgundy. So this one has a lot more purple in it. This one has more brown in it. And here's kind of a true red for comparison. Just in case you were trying to decide between those two reds and you don't have the color cards. Because I only ordered one skein, because then the socks only cost me $8 to knit, I used contrast color for the heels and toes. I had leftover Quince & Company Finch and apricot from a pair of socks that I knit a friend, and I overdyed it into this deeper, more autumnal orange. And it was in two different balls, and I dyed them slightly differently. So I used one ball for the toes and one ball for the heel on both socks so that they would match. And I love how they turned out. The pattern is 100 Acre Woods by Alice Yu. It's from the book Socktopus, which my library has. I do not recommend this book if you are a loose knitter with small feet, because I distinctly remember one of the patterns for the small size, it just told you to knit at 11 stitches to the inch. So, what I did, I prefer a 56 stitch sock when I'm knitting with Quince & Company Finch, and so I used the charts from the size large, but I didn't repeat where she told you to repeat, so that worked out to be 56 stitches basically. I can't remember, I think the small was 60 stitches in that one. Like, it's not like every pattern she has in there, it just tells you to knit tighter for smaller socks, but I don't know. I distinctly remember that a lot of those socks I looked at and I was like, oh, those aren't going to fit my foot, so just depends. If you're a naturally tight knitter, that won't be a problem for you, but I'm not. So I knit these on size 0s, which is how I always knit my socks, and I knit it English style, and I'm a little tighter knitting throwing or English style than continental, so when I went to pull them on, they are snug over my foot. However, once they're on, they fit really, really well, so that's okay. And I did these toe up because that's the way the pattern is written, and I wanted my leaves to go that way. And so because it's a contrast color, you can see my favorite toe up heel really well here. So what you do is you just knit normally until when you try it on, you're at the point where your leg meets your foot. And then you do a heel flap the same way that you would do for a top-down sock. And you turn your heel the exact same way, and you pick up stitches the exact same way. And then you're decreasing the gusset as you go up the leg, as opposed to if you were knitting a top-down sock, you would be decreasing the gusset as you went down the foot. So that way I don't have to guess where to start gusset increases, because gusset heels fit me the best. So I really enjoy this sock heel, and it's the one I use whenever I have to knit toe up, although I prefer knitting cuff down. And in order to make sure that that heel flap is still reinforced, what I do is after I've picked up the stitches, I count, because I know I'm going to decrease to the same amount. So since I was knitting 56 stitches, I needed to have 28. So I put stitch markers around those 28 stitches, well, around 26 stitches, because one of each is going to be the gusset decrease. And then I do the slip stitch pattern, and I use Eye of Partridge. I don't know why I'm trying to show you it like that. That's clearly not going to work, but I like the Eye of Partridge slip stitch. So I do the slip stitch pattern just between the stitch markers, and so then my gusset decreases are on plain stockinette. And I really lucked out this time in that just as I finished the gusset decreases, it was time for another repeat of the lace. I did not plan that at all. I just got lucky. So, and I just did a normal bind off up on the cuff, and it's stretchy enough for me. And, oh, I should talk about the toe a little bit on these. Oh my gosh, this is going to be such a long episode. I think I have to start a new segment already. So, these are not decreases. They are wrap and turns, because instead of doing a typical toe up toe where you cast on here and then you increase around, I did a short row toe, which has you provisionally cast on here, and so then you're knitting on half of your foot stitches and you're knitting short rows to make the toe more narrow instead of increasing or decreasing, right? So you knit and you turn one more stitch every time, and then you get to your preferred width. I have a very wide toe box, so I did 12 stitches, which is always what I do when I'm grafting as well. And then you work another set of short rows back, so then you have the entire toe, and you're knitting this flat the whole time. I do it on 2 double points because, you know, it's not enough stitches that I need to worry. And then you undo your provisional cast on, and you're ready to knit in the round. So I learned this toe from Wendy Johnson, and it's the toe that I used for the first 2 or 3 socks that I knit. Yeah, 2 for me and 1 for Mom. So actually the leaf burgundy socks, the first pair, was my 4th pair of socks. Anyway, and I just happened to get her book, Socks from the Toe Up, from the library. And when I was reading about the toe constructions, that one seemed the simplest. I'm not sure why, but that's what I did. And because you work it the same way as a short row heel, it did mean that I could do the toe and heel the same way. Yeah, and she recommends a crochet provisional cast on, which is probably what attracted me at the time, because as a child I did a lot of crocheting. So I'm like, oh, at least I know I can do that. But these days I use the provisional cast on from Tech Knitter, and it'll be linked on this project page because it goes so quickly. It's the fastest cast on I know, because you're literally just doing this between 2 strands of yarn. The only downside to that is the first row you knit, once you've undone your provisional cast on, half the stitches are sitting the wrong way. So you just have to either knit through the back loop or like rearrange them depending on what's easiest for you. But it is so much faster than trying to pick up into crochet loops or try to crochet over your hook. And really, when I discovered that provisional cast on, that's when I started doing provisionally casting on like all kinds of projects. It's probably one of my most used cast ons at this point. So, as I said, I knit this toe quite a bit in my early socks, and then I moved on to other things, mainly cuff down socks. And when I started doing toe up socks again, I was trying different toes, and none of them fit as well as top down socks. And then I was wearing one of my early pair of socks, and I realized that, hey, this toe actually fits really well. So I went back to it, and even though I learned from a book, she does have a free tutorial on Knitty. It's like the 2002 edition of Knitty. I love it. It tells you that there's a lot of photos, so you might have to, depending on your bandwidth, you know, step away from the computer and wait for everything to load. Oh, gives me such nostalgia for high school. Anyway. So I have included a link to that if you're interested. And to me, the real advantage of this toe, other than the fact that it fits really nicely on my broad toes, is that I love double-pointed needles. I dislike magic looping, and so when I do one of the cast-ons where you cast on at the top, that means that at some point I've got like 3 to 4 stitches on 4 needles, and it's just like a porcupine of a mess. And even though it goes fairly quickly, with this method everything's easy. Like I just am working back and forth flat on 2 needles. I'm not trying to like knit around in tiny circles and make sure that my increases are working out and all that kind of stuff. So, and I really enjoy doing short rows, so that's never a problem for me. I love seeing the fabric kind of take shape. I think this is a particularly magical looking toe because you're knitting flat, but you end up with this curved piece of fabric. So, that is all I have to say about these socks. And as I said, I knit them a little bit taller than the other socks I've been knitting, but I only used 48 grams of the main color, and then I think about 16 grams of the contrast. Apologies if you can hear the very cranky crow. I have trees right outside my window, and there's like a gang of crows that hang out. Maybe that's a blue jay. It's inside the tree, so I can't see it. They both have really loud squawks. Whew. We are finally done with finished objects. Oh, it is a J. I should have known. Crows are at least a little appealing. Blue jays are just, ugh. It's a good thing they're pretty. Sorry, I have my teapot on top of the book that I'm going to read to you from. So this book is called Tam Lin by Pamela Dean, and it has a really hideous cover, so I'm just going to show you the title page because I don't want you judging it by its really hideous cover. Okay. There it is. Maybe I'll show you the cover at the end. This book is wonderful. It's part of Terry Windling's fairy tale retelling series, but this one is a retelling of a ballad. I'm not going to tell you what happens as far as plot goes, because if you don't know the ballad, which is called Tam Lin, then you're not going to know what happens in the book. Do not read the back, at least my edition with the hideous cover gives away epic spoilers on the back. I hate it when publishers do that. Why make that decision? Anyway, okay, so this book is set in a small liberal arts college in Minnesota in the 1970s. And it follows Janet, who is an English major, from her freshman year through the beginning of her senior year. And a lot of the book, I think you're around over page 250 out of 450 pages before you finish the freshman year. So a lot of this book is just about settling into college and the magic of finding people who kind of speak your language. And she in particular makes these friends, and they all like quote Shakespeare at each other and various other authors. And so I found this book a few years ago and read it for the first time, and now it's one of my fall treats. Like, I read it every autumn. I just start craving it because I went to a liberal arts Midwestern college, and even though my friends and I were more likely to quote Monty Python to each other than Shakespeare, and I was not an English major. Man, that J, sorry. Anyway, it just brings back that real magic of living on your own for the first time, kind of like boarding school, but you're in college, so you have more independence and more fun. And this book is, I just love it for that. And in addition to that, so it's mainly just like a everyday, really bookish college boarding school kind of novel. But it does have an element of fairy in that the classics department, like there are lots of jokes about how weird classic majors are in the campus and how odd the professors are, and the professors are trying to kind of aggressively recruit Janet to be a classics major instead of an English major. And it turns out that there's an element of fairy that's going on in the classics department. And that is all I will say about that. But if you are at all bookish, I am positive you will love this book. Obviously not everyone went to a Midwestern liberal arts college, but I just think you will love this book regardless. So the passage that I have to share is not about knitting, but it is about fiber arts, and Janet is getting dressed for a party. Okay. She went around the corner to her closet and pulled out the white muslin shirt her grandmother had made, with green leaves and vines embroidered on all the hems and 3 tiny roses that it was a game to find. What a gorgeous shirt, said Molly. It doesn't go with jeans, though, somehow. It probably wants a skirt, said Janet, but I haven't got anything but jean skirts. Oh well, said Molly. So I just love that there's like a game in the embroidery that her grandmother has sewed in. If I take up another fiber arts craft, it would be kind of in the embroidery cross-stitch area so that I can start embroidering my own clothes. You know me, I love details, so that would be wonderful. Especially since I've come to accept that I'm not going to be sewing my own dresses and all those adorable prints that all the sewists use to make their amazing clothes. So one of the neat things about the book is that Pamela always has Janet dressing in green, and Janet is a redhead, but green is also a color very traditionally associated with fairy, and so I just think that that's a wonderful touch, and it makes me want to wear more green, despite not being a redhead. The Tolkien professor does a great episode in his fairy tale and fantasy series about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and he talks a lot about green and fairy in that. If you're interested, it's a podcast, so you can audio podcast. But Sir Gawain and the Green Knight has been one of my favorite stories since I was in elementary school. My mom had been taking a college class in English literature, and she came home and she's like, "You have to read this. It's so funny." So she read it all out to me from her Norton anthology, and I loved it. So I still reread it. Lately, I can't remember. A poet translated it. Seamus, maybe? Seamus someone? He might have been Beowulf. Anyway, and he kept all the alliteration in, and it's a really great translation. If you're interested in reading it, it's quite short. It's a medieval, not ballad, story poem kind of thing, but like it doesn't rhyme because they were more into alliteration than end rhymes. Okay, now I'm just rambling about things that I don't know because I was not an English major. While I'm on the topic of books, I am starting a read-along. I think it's going to mainly be on Instagram. I'm really sorry for those of you who don't use Instagram. It's just the easiest for me because it's the most phone-friendly. But we are going to read, hang on, it's got this really cool title. Let's see. Under the Pendulum Sun by Jeanette Ng. Her last name is NG. She's from Hong Kong. So Celeste, can you help me out? How am I supposed to pronounce that? And so this just came out, but it is available both in Europe and England and the US. I did not check Australia, but I would assume so. Usually Australia and Canada get books at the same time England gets them. And the print copy is around $9. The ebook copy is around $7 US. And of course your library might have it as well. So, as I said, the author is from Hong Kong. She now lives in England, and she has a master's in medieval and Renaissance history. And right there, I was already sold. But the book itself is a Victorian fantasy kind of gothic novel about two missionaries in Victorian England who go to be missionaries in Fairy. So clearly, there's more of an interaction with Fairy, kind of the way that Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or, oh my gosh, Stardust by Neil Gaiman, that kind of thing. And the cover is amazing. And I read like the first, the preview from the book. Here's the cover. It's like purple epicness. And I read the first few pages that you can read on Amazon, and I just thought it sounded wonderful, and one of my favorite bookish friends also highly recommends it. And I'm really excited to see that there are more and more women of color publishing fantasy novels. So I really want to support that. So if you would like to join me in reading, you are more than welcome. And of course, if you're not on Instagram, you can just use that comment thread in the Ravelry group. I want to give everyone a week or two to get a copy of it. So I'm recording on November 3rd. This will probably upload tomorrow on November 4th. And so I'm thinking we'll start sometime between November 10th and 15th, depending on how long everyone takes to get their book. And then we'll just read at our own paces and talk about it, probably using an Instagram hashtag, and then we'll do a group direct message on Instagram for spoiler kind of stuff. But as I said, you can also share comments in the Ravelry thread. So if you are interested in that, I know that I share a lot of fantasy books here. I do read other things, but fantasy is definitely one of my first and best loves. So, and I know that quite a few of you seem to enjoy fantasy as well. So, if you're interested in that, just let me know over on Instagram or in the Ravelry comments thread or down here on YouTube. It's easy. Just if you're gonna talk about the book with spoilers, make sure you do big spoiler tags. I am anti-spoiler. Okay, Schrodinger's socks. I really should not have picked a German name for this segment. Anyway. So this is where I talk about yarn that I already have in my stash, and I'm contemplating what project I should knit with it, and I am asking you for help. That's essentially the point of this. So this yarn could become any kind of project, right? The same way that Schrodinger's cat could be both alive and dead. So this is all Barocco Ultra Alpaca Fine, which is a sock yarn. And now, because of my spider socks, I have it in gray, I have it in taupe, I have it in cream, and I have it in red. And I have about between 35 and 45 grams of each colorway. And I want to knit myself a pair of Christmas socks. I knit my first pair of Christmas socks last year, and they were they're ridiculous, but in like a charming way, in an ugly sweater kind of way, because I was rolling a dice for each day of Advent, and it was really fun. But this year I'd like to go a little bit more classic. So I know that a lot of Scandinavian color work tends to use gray, cream, and red. I just threw the taupe in there just in case. I don't know, because I have it. So basically I'm looking for ideas. I don't know, should I stripe it? Should I do like the flex, so it's kind of like polka dots? I'm thinking I'll do a little bit of stranded work right under the cuff like I did on my blue stocking socks, but I don't know if there are some already out there Christmas patterns that you would recommend. I mean, I've got a lot of design color work stuff, so I'm sure that I can find something in my books, a chart that's Christmassy, or I can get that Scandinavian motifs book out from the library by Mary Jane Mucklestone. But yeah, I'm very undecided, and you know, I could use one for contrast heels, toes, and cuffs, and then do like stripes or speckles or whatever in the other two, but I don't know which should be which. I want to make them pretty tall, because my other pair of socks is pretty short, because I was trying to fit them into Advent. But I definitely want like a really tall, snuggly pair to wear on Christmas when I usually don't get out of my pajamas all day, because we do our big fancy celebration on Christmas Eve. So, opinions welcome on Christmas socks and classic designs. I don't know, guys. There's a drops pattern that I was looking at, but then I just watched Ellie of Skander's latest episode, and apparently drops is really into ripping off other designers' patterns, so now I can't use those because I don't want to support them. So, yeah. Feel free to let me know if you have any suggestions or ideas or opinions about which colors I should use together and how. The final segment of me talking at you before we get to Knits in the Wild is a yarn review. And since it's sweater weather, can we talk about how I haven't finished knitting a sweater since September 3rd, and that's 2 months now. I got really distracted. I just wanted to cast on all the things. And so I did. So I've knit a whole lot of smaller projects, but my sweaters have suffered, and it makes me sad. So this month I'm getting back to sweater knitting, as well as Christmas gift knitting. But anyway, okay, so that was just my brief tangent about, it's really funny, like I was worried that I was starting to have too many wool sweaters, and then the weather turned, and now I want to wear a wool sweater every day, and it does not seem like I have nearly enough to do that. I mean, I do, but, you know, it seems like there's plenty of room for more sweaters in my rotation. Okay, so I am reviewing Canopy Fingering by Fiber Company, which I think they started out as an independent dyer, and now they're quite a big manufacturer, but like an independent big one, so like Quince, that kind of thing. And of course I didn't look up and have prepared to tell you what the blend is. Their yarns tend to have interesting blends. So this one, I know it has bamboo, baby alpaca, and merino in it, but I cannot tell you the ratio. Okay, 50% alpaca, I think it's baby alpaca, 30% merino, and 20% rayon made from bamboo. I guess, yeah, it is baby alpaca. And there are 200 yards or 183 meters per 50 grams. This is a very pricey yarn. I only knit a sweater out of it because I got a really good deal on D-Stash, but it retails for $14 a skein. Yeah, which is very pricey. I definitely, that's out of my price range for normal yarn. But I got a very large sweaters quantity for $60 on D-Stash, and this is the Sarsaparilla colorway, which is a really pretty cool brown, and it's got kind of silvery colors. I love their colors. So, and they have some really beautiful blues, which I am still looking for the perfect blue for a sweater. We'll talk about that another day. And so I thought that if I really liked this yarn, then, you know, I could save up and just knit fewer sweaters and have one in blue. But this is not, I would never knit another sweater in this yarn. And that is because, apparently, even though I love baby alpaca and cowls and mittens, I've I've even managed to use alpaca to knit a hat, but it was like a brushed alpaca, and I did some I-cord stuff so that it stays on my head. Anyway, it apparently is just too itchy for my skin when I knit it into a sweater. This yarn feels so soft in the skein, and it felt so soft and luxurious while I was knitting it up, and then I put the sweater on, and my skin crawled. It was incredibly disappointing. This is a sweater that taught me that I should not buy sweater quantities of a yarn until I've already knit at least one project out of it and like wrapped it around my skin. So that's why these days I tend to knit like mitts and that kind of stuff to try out yarn. So that is the number one reason why I will not knit a sweater out of it, because it drives me nuts to have to wear a long sleeve shirt under a sweater. I know that a lot of people just do that normally, but my issue is that if it's a long sleeve t-shirt, then that's two knit fabrics and they kind of cling to each other. And maybe if I had knit a very large oversized sweater so the fabrics weren't rubbing so much, then it wouldn't bother me, but that's just not the kind of garments that I tend to knit. I tend to knit more fitted garments, and I hate the feel of the t-shirt sticking to the sleeve, and yeah. I think I've got some textural issues going on, sensitivities. And so I would be able to wear a long sleeve woven top under this, except it is really difficult to find truly long sleeve woven blouses in women's department, unless you want a collared shirt, and I don't like collared shirts, and collared shirts aren't going to work because there's a sailor collar on this sweater. I designed it myself, by the way. I used custom fit to generate the numbers, but I did a little sailor collar inspired by Phryne Fisher of Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries. So this is like the high maintenance sweater in my sweater drawer, because there are very few shirts that I can wear under it, and like I can't even, if it's like a see-through silk blouse, that's not enough to protect me from the yarn. It's kind of itching my lap just sitting here. Anyway, so I still am trying to find the perfect blouse to wear underneath it. I'll see if I find anything at Goodwill when I'm home for Christmas. And it's such a shame because this is such a beautiful sweater. And the other issue with it is that I knit it longer. Oh, but we're doing a yarn review, not a sweater review, so that does not matter. Okay, so as I said, I'm fine wearing merino and rayon, so it's got to be the baby alpaca, which is itching me. So yeah, just because it feels super soft in the skein doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to feel soft on your body. So the other issue I have with this sweater, and remember this is very expensive yarn, is that it pills. Here, let me get close to the camera so you can see. I don't know if you can see, like that's a giant pill right there. I don't know if this is going to work. And it's pilled down the sleeve. And the pills do kind of pop off. And it's mainly pilled, you know, on the sides where things touch it. Like it looks perfectly fine on the body. However, keep in mind this is a high maintenance sweater, so I have not worn it as much as I wear the rest of my sweaters. So those are two strikes against it for me and why I would not wear it as another sweater. However, as you can see, it has an absolutely beautiful drape from the alpaca and rayon, and it does not grow as much as I thought it would. I knit it seamed so that it would have extra structure, and when I first block it, it hits about here, and now it hits about here. So with multiple wearings, it grows maybe an inch, 2.5 centimeters, but the sleeves like haven't really grown that much. So I think as long as you knit it with seams, you're not going to have a huge problem with the alpaca growth. I think it's an absolutely beautiful yarn, but if I were to use it again, I would use it for accessories like hats or maybe a scarf. Scarves get a lot of wear though, so I'd probably have to be deep pilling it, but hats, maybe gloves. Once again, there's a deep pilling issue, but with all that alpaca, they would be really snug, warm gloves that you could still move your fingers in. And I have no clue how this yarn was manufactured, or where it came from, or where it was sourced, which is another reason why I'm a little bit skeptical. If I'm spending that much money on yarn, it needs to be ethically grown. But that's, that's my spending decisions. So, I guess that wasn't a very positive review. As I said, there are really nice things about this yarn. It was a pleasure to knit with. It still feels so nice and snuggly. And it's very warm from the alpaca, even though it's fingering weight. And I mean, it's beautiful. It comes in absolutely beautiful colors. I have enough left over to make a hat, which is what I say about every single project I knit. I recognize that. But I really hope I do get around to knitting the hat because I think it would be lovely. But yeah, I definitely, the whole sleeve is filled, not just down. So I definitely would never use this to knit a sweater again, even if it wasn't $14 a skein. And I don't know, like, it makes a beautiful stockinette fabric. I didn't try it in cables or textures, so I can't really speak to how it would make that, or how it would look with that, but it looks quite nice in twisted rib, so it would probably show off cables and texture pretty well. I did just this little eyelet stitch in it. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. I'm sorry. I would have thought I had more to say, but this was definitely, it was very disheartening to finish my sweater and put it on for the first time and realize that I wasn't going to be able to just throw it on over anything. But I do wear it. I just have to, think harder about it than I would necessarily like to. And I guess that's my yarn review. I guess I'm mainly showing it to you guys so that you know how it wears. And then, because it's tightly plied, I think that's why it doesn't pill on the body, just like, under the sleeves and on the side. So I think it could make a good sweater if you don't have issues with baby alpaca. Especially kind of a more drapey open sweater, which is very trendy and popular right now. I'm sorry, I'm still in a flare-up, so my brain is not functioning at full capacity, but I didn't want to go more than 2 weeks without recording. Hopefully that was somewhat useful to you. If you have any more questions about the yarn, I am really happy to answer them. I think that my disappointment with this sweater is probably coloring my opinions about the yarn. But, I mean, that's the point of a review, right, is to give your personal opinion. So, there you have it. That is this week's episode, other than Knits in the Wild. Because I'm not doing a voiceover, I haven't tried editing it yet, and I don't know how much more time it would take to add text. So I might or might not add text naming the projects in the photos, but if I don't, all my projects are on my project page. You might have to scroll a bit, which I know is annoying, but if you're motivated, it doesn't take that long, right? Like a couple minutes, and I bet it would take longer than that for me to type in all of the information. And since I try to make podcasting as least work as possible so that I can do it more frequently. Because with my chronic illnesses, I have limited energy. So I keep the editing process as simple as possible. So it is very likely that you're just going to see photos and have some music accompanying it. And if you're interested in any of the projects, they are all on the project page. Just scrolling. And you can do an advanced search in Ravelry and do just sweaters or just socks, and that'll help you narrow it down further. Hope that was useful. I had a really good time chatting with you guys, as I always do. I apologize again for being a bit scatterbrained and random, but hopefully you enjoyed it anyway. And now the only thing we have left to do is to torment the pets. So, here's Moth, Thistle, and myself. saying goodbye to you, and hopefully we will see you soon. Bye. Look, they don't even fight it anymore. Oh. Oh.